And welcome back and happy holidays, everyone. In today's video, I'm going to provide an update regarding the California housing market. It's been about 1 month since I made a video for you guys, so I'm going to provide an update for you regarding home prices, housing inventory, new listings, the share of price reductions, and much, much more. Stay tuned towards the middle of this video here because I'll provide my own analysis regarding home price trends over the past 10 years or so. So with that said, let's begin today's video. This is based on a new report from the California Association of Realtors for the month of November. So existing home sales, which by the way, I should say that today's video is based on stats for existing single family home sales. So existing means the resale market, excluding brand new home construction. And this video or this report here is only looking at single family houses. So home sales, this is the seasonally adjusted annualized number, approximately 224,000. That's down about 5.8% compared to November of 2022. And year to date, down a whopping 26%. Huge decrease in sales due to a huge decrease in demand because rates have increased, but also because inventory levels still remain very, very low as well. So the median sold price in California increased on a year-over-year basis to $822,000. That's a gain of 6.2% from 12 months ago. But home prices overall have been decreasing over the past 3 months. Again, I'll share some stats regarding that here in a little bit. Meanwhile, the unsold inventory index, this is the month supply, is at 3 months. This assumes that if no new listings were to hit the market, all the houses listed for sale right now would be sold in 3 months based on the current sales pace. That's down 6.3% year over year. Days on the market, this is a time frame when you list your house for sale until you accept an offer from a home buyer. That's at 21 days, which means that houses on average are selling about 28% faster compared to last year. Okay, let's talk a little bit more regarding home sales, and then we'll talk about home prices. So according to CAR, sales slipped near the trough from the Great Recession, excluding the pandemic shutdown. So the current sales pace right now, again, around 224,000. That's down by about 6% year over year, and also down a whopping 7.4% compared to the previous month. And we're right here, excluding the pandemic shutdown, which of course a lot of people are not buying houses when people are forced to stay at their houses. The current sales pace right now is more or less on par with 2007 and 2008. Also have a look at this because home sales on a year-over-year basis have now decreased for 29 consecutive months. A huge decrease, what's that? About 2.5 years in which home sales have decreased compared to the previous year. Now, here's something that caught my attention here because sales at the top end of the market, again, the median sold price in California, around 822,000, yet home sales in the range of 1 million to 2 million and also over 2 million increase compared to November 2022. Isn't that wild that home sales over $1 million increase, whereas every other price segment here decreased compared to 12 months ago? In fact, the share by price segment of houses that did sell this November compared to November 2022, the share this year was 32%, whereas last year at this time, it was at 28%. So about 3 of every 10 houses that sold in November were for over $1 million in California. Let's also have a look at the number of pending home sales year over year, because that decreased by 7.3%. Remember what happened last year though, right? Sales tanked. And so it's really telling here that pending home sales are still down compared to 12 months ago. This implies that closed home sales will remain very low in December and potentially in January as well. Okay, let's talk about home prices in California because the California home sold price increased for the 5th month in a row, but this is on a year-over-year basis. So year-over-year, home sales have increased for 5 consecutive months. but it did decrease by 2.2% compared to October. Okay, let's get a little bit nerdy here because here's my own analysis of the California Association of Realtors data here. The only two columns I pulled from their website is the month as well as the price. Everything else I added based on my own nerdy analysis here. So the median sold price this November, 822,000, an increase of 6.2% year over year, but down 2.2% compared to the previous month. So here's why I want to tell you guys here, because this 6.2% increase year over year, again, is the 5th consecutive month of annual increases. That was after 8 consecutive months of decreases. This is also the highest year-over-year increase since May of 2022. Back in May last year, we'd reached all-time record highs for home prices, increasing to nearly $900,000. However, even though this is the highest increase since May last year, when comparing this to the average going back to 2010, it's actually lower. This gain of 6.2% is lower than the average November year-over-year change going back to 2010 at 7.8%. In addition to that, the decrease compared to October, down by 2.2%, is worse than the average November month-to-month change. That's the average October through November change going back to 2010 is a decrease of 1.4%, whereas this year it fell by 2.2%. Now, a couple of things I want to mention regarding this decrease of 2.2% this month compared to October here is that it's entirely normal to see prices decrease in the late fall and winter months. But what we're seeing this year is not as bad as what we saw last year. Remember, last year was the big correction we saw due to the huge increase in rates and inventory levels in the summer through the winter months last year. So let me just kind of break this down for you guys. So in August this year, compared to July, home sold prices increased by 3.3%. Whereas last year, it increased by only 0.5%. So again, we were seeing this August compared to July was very, very small last year, whereas this year, a big increase of 3.3%. Then the decreases we saw in September through November. This September, down 1.9%, whereas last year, it decreased by 2.1%. This October, a decrease of 0.4%, compared to a big increase of 2.3% last year. Then this November, down by 2.2% versus the 3% decline we saw in 2022. So big picture here, even though we have mortgage rates above 6.5% ever since really May this year, and rates higher compared to last year, home prices are still holding up relatively well and are not decreasing at the levels we saw last year. And one of the main reasons for that is because inventory levels are not skyrocketing this year like we saw last year. In a very short period of time, about 6 months, inventory levels doubled. And that was during the spring and summer months last year, whereas this year, inventory levels were only increasing very, very slightly. I'll have an update for you guys here in a little bit regarding that as well. But wait, there's more, because I want to share how the home price changes compared to pre-pandemic levels. So the change in the median sold price here in California from November 2019 through November 2020, which is technically post-COVID, but we saw a giant increase of 18.5%. In November 2018 through 19, that was pre-COVID, we saw a gain of 6.4%, roughly on par with the gain we're seeing right now, a gain of 6.2%. In November 2017 through November 2018, only an increase of 1.4%. That was because back in November 2018, rates increased to a whopping 5%. And because rates increased from around 4 to about 5%, home prices only increased very, very slightly back in 2018. Then, just for comparison's sake, the big crash we saw in 07 and 08, this is a change in prices from November 07 through November 2008, a giant decrease of 41%, whereas this year, a big increase of 6.2%. Just for fun, have a look at this for you guys who think we're going to see 2008 again here. So in September 2008, home sold prices here in California decreased a whopping 40.4% compared to the year before that. Also a giant decrease of 9.5% in one single month. Absolutely insane. The next month, a decrease of 3.8%. Then it decreased greatly again in November, down 6.3%. And then to top it all off, back in January 2009, compared to December, it decreased by 11.7%. This means in a span of just 5 months, September 2008 through January 2009, home sold prices decreased a whopping 22%. I also want to share this with you guys as well. So last year's correction, which was May last year, all-time record highs, through February this year, which was a trough, that was a decrease of 18%. That was the last year's correction. Home sold prices decreased in California, down by nearly 20%. However, home prices have increased by about 12% ever since then. That is from February at 735,000 to 822,000, a gain of 12%. So because prices have increased by 12% ever since February this year, this is why we're only down by about 8% from last year's peak. Again, going from about 893,000, now at 822,000. So last year's correction, or the last year's peak, compared to what we're seeing right now, is not as bad as last year's correction because home sold prices have increased by 12% ever since February this year. Also, just for fun, when looking at home sold prices over the past 3 years, which 3 years ago we were at about 700,000. So prices have increased by about 18% over the past 3 years. All right, please leave me a comment below with your thoughts regarding this analysis I provided here because there's a very minimal amount of analysis for home prices in this report from the California Association of Realtors. So let's get back to the report here. For you guys who are interested in condos and townhomes in California, prices increased from $610,000. Now it's at $660,000. For existing single-family houses, the price per square foot this November is at $421 flat compared to the previous month. Also, the sales price to final list price ratio is at 100%. This means on average for all the houses that sold this November in California, the home seller sold their house for their final list price. That has been paid at 100% for several months now. What I will say, it's not as bad as the 96% ratio we saw in late 2022, which meant back then that houses were selling for about 4% less than the final list price. But also it's quite a bit less compared to the huge gains we saw in the spring months of 2021 and 2022, when that ratio was 104%, which means sellers were gaining their house or selling their houses for about 4% over asking. Here's also a look at the percent of houses that are selling above the seller's list price. This November, it's at 39.7%. 1 year ago, it was at nearly 23%. The peak, which was set back in the crazy spring months of 2022, when our housing market was just absolutely insane. Back then, that ratio was 73%. So the vast majority of houses that sold back in April were selling for over the seller's list price. Now it's only at 40%. So even though it is much lower compared to the peak, it's actually still higher compared to pre-pandemic levels. So for example, November is not really here, but right about right here, in November 2019, 2018, as well as 2017, that ratio was around 30%. Now it's at nearly 40%. Just taking a step back here though, what I will say here is that even though We're higher compared to pre-COVID levels at about 40% right now. This means that approximately 60% of all houses that sold this November sold at or below the seller's list price. In other words, our housing market is not nearly as crazy as 2021 and the early parts of 2022. Let's also have a look at this because everyone says that the rate doesn't even matter. The rate does matter, in fact, because the rate for a 30-year fix mortgage, of course, was at 6.8%. This November, it was at 7.44%. So rates have increased by about, 60 basis points compared to 12 months ago. And because prices have increased by 6.2% on top of that, so we're seeing this double whammy, right? Prices up by about 6%, and also rates have also increased compared to last year as well. And because of this, your average monthly housing payment increased by 13.1%, not 6.2%. So this increase in your payments is due to prices and due to increases of rates as well. In regards to inventory levels, the month supply right now is at 3 months. This still remains very low as well because the average from approximately 2014 through 2019 was around 4 to 5 months. Now it's only at 3 months. Having said that, look at 2007. The month supply increased about 16 months back then. Now it's only 3 months. Let's also have a look at the total amount of houses actually for sale or housing inventory or active listings. So this year, inventory levels peaked late in the year. In fact, they peaked in October, which is highly unusual. As you can see in 2018 and 2019, inventory levels peaked in the summer months, then they fell off after that. What I will say here is that inventory levels just barely creeped up this year, a slow increase, which is normal. But what was not normal last year is that inventory levels absolutely skyrocketed. So for example, back in February, there was under 20,000 houses for sale statewide. But by the time we hit June and July, inventory levels doubled to 40,000. So inventory levels doubled in about 6 months or less than that. Whereas this year, inventory levels barely increased and we only saw a slow, steady increase of inventory, not this skyrocketing effect like we saw last year, which of course shocked our housing market and caused home prices to decrease greatly as well. One more thing I do want to mention regarding active listings here is that right now we have approximately 25,000 homes for sale statewide. Compare this to November 2019 and 2018. There's around 45,000 to approximately 55,000 homes for sale. So historically speaking, we still have a housing supply issue here in California and frankly across the United States as well. Inventory levels is still down as well compared to a year ago, down by 16.4%. It says here active listings or housing inventory have remained below last year for 8 months in a row. So down compared to last year, whereas in 2022, huge increases. So for example, in late 2022, inventory increased by about 80% compared to the previous year. One thing I do want to mention regarding inventory levels is that we're not seeing a surge of new listings right now. In fact, for 16 consecutive months, the number of new listings is down year over year. This November, there was 13,662 new listings statewide, but back in 2019, nearly 17,000, and back in November of 2018, nearly 20,000. So this means that the number of new listings this November is down by about 18% compared to November of 2019 and down a whopping 31% from 2018. Let's also talk about how fast or how slow houses are selling in California. So the median days in the market is at 21 days right now, but 12 months ago, it was at 29 days. This means on average that houses are selling about 8 days faster compared to last year. And lastly, let's have a look at the share of price reductions, because according to CAR, this November is at 37%. We have been seeing this slow, steady increase this year. This is much different than last year. So back in January 2022, that share of price reductions was around 15%. Whereas by the time we hit the late summer months and early fall months last year, that increased to about 45%. So a giant increase in the share of price reductions last year, whereas this year, we're seeing a seasonal increase right now. And with that said, please comment below your biggest takeaways from today's video. Also, if you guys are new here, I invite you to subscribe to this channel right now, because I post frequent housing market updates so you guys can make a more informed decision about whether to buy or sell a house right now. Also, this is part 1 of my 2-part video series I make each and every month. So stay tuned for part 2, in which I go over how each of the counties in California fared, because of course, there are some very big differences here. Hope you guys have an awesome day and look forward to seeing you on the next video.